London in the first years of Victoria's reign was a city that breathed judgment as naturally as fog, and nowhere was that breath more stifling than in the drawing-rooms where marriages were negotiated like treaties. It was there that Miss Eleanor Harcourt first learned that security, once promised, could be withdrawn without warning, leaving nothing but silence in its place. She had been engaged for 8 months, long enough for her future to feel solid, but not long enough to defend itself against whispers spoken by people who never looked her in the eye. Eleanor was not remarkable in beauty, nor deficient in it, and she had been raised to understand that such moderation was an advantage. Her manners were exact, her education thorough, her conduct irreproachable, and these qualities had made her suitable. Suitability, in her world, was the highest form of praise. Her mother, long deceased, had taught her that affection might grow later, but reputation must be secured first, and Eleanor had believed her. She had believed, too, that her engagement marked the end of uncertainty, a lawful passage from daughterhood into a recognized place within society's careful hierarchy. The letter that ended everything arrived on a pale afternoon, delivered by a servant who would not meet her gaze. It was brief, respectful in tone, and merciless in implication. The family of her intended, after careful consideration, had decided the union was no longer advisable. No cause was named, though several were suggested by omission. Eleanor read the words once, then again, noting how cleanly they avoided her name, as though even ink might be contaminated by association. By evening, the news had traveled faster than any carriage. Invitations were delayed, conversations paused when she entered a room, and sympathetic glances were offered with a delicacy that felt sharper than cruelty. Eleanor understood, as all women were trained to understand, that an engagement once broken cast suspicion backward as well as forward. If she had been refused, then something in her must be wanting. Fortune, perhaps. Blood, perhaps. Moral character, in the most damaging sense, perhaps. What was not said aloud was said everywhere else. Her maternal grandfather had been a merchant, prosperous but not landed. Her dowry, while sufficient, was not impressive. And beyond these practical deficiencies lay a more dangerous concern, murmured only in trusted circles, that Eleanor's connection might prove politically inconvenient. Such judgments were not hers to contest. They were made by men whose lives were untouched by their consequences. Her former fiancé did not call. He did not write. He allowed his family to speak for him, a silence that Eleanor received as both cowardice and mercy. To argue would have required her to plead, and pleading would have confirmed the very doubts that had undone her. Pride, that fragile inheritance of the powerless, became her sole remaining defense. She resolved to leave London before she could be summoned, questioned, or pitted into submission. There were distant relations in the north who would receive her without curiosity, or so she hoped, and obscurity offered a kind of shelter that society did not. She instructed her maid to pack only what was necessary, and she left no messages behind, understanding instinctively that explanations were rarely believed and never forgiven. The morning of her departure arrived gray and cold, the city subdued beneath a sky heavy with unshed rain. Eleanor descended the steps of the townhouse where she had spent her season, her gloved hands steady despite the quiet turmoil beneath them. She did not look back. To do so would have been to acknowledge defeat, and she had decided that withdrawal, if dignified, might yet resemble choice. As her carriage rolled through streets still damp from the night, Eleanor allowed herself one unguarded thought, not of loss, but of astonishment. How swiftly a woman's future could be revised by voices she never heard. How easily certainty dissolved when it was not protected by power. These reflections were interrupted only when the carriage slowed near the edge of Grosvenor Square, traffic briefly congested by the arrival of another conveyance. The second carriage was unmistakable, its lines severe, its pace controlled, its panels bearing a crest recognized even by those who pretended not to notice such things. Servants straightened. Passers-by paused. Eleanor felt the shift before she understood it, a subtle reordering of attention that pressed against the carriage walls. The Duke of Ashbourne had arrived. She had seen him only at a distance before, a tall figure marked by reserve, his presence noted less for warmth than for gravity. Widowed young, influential by inheritance and aptitude, he was spoken of with respect rather than affection, and his approval carried weight precisely because it was rarely given. That his carriage should halt beside hers was an event that required explanation, though none was offered immediately. A footman approached, deferential yet composed, and delivered a message so quietly it might have been imagined. The Duke requested a word. Eleanor's pulse betrayed her composure, but she inclined her head in assent, aware that refusal would provoke more notice than compliance. As the door opened and the morning air entered, she sensed that whatever awaited her was not an accident. In that moment, suspended between departure and interruption, Eleanor understood that her private humiliation had touched something larger than herself. The broken engagement, she realized, had not merely dismissed her, it had interfered with designs beyond her knowing. And as she prepared to meet the Duke's gaze, she felt, for the first time since the letter arrived, that her story was not yet finished. The carriage doors remained open, the street hushed as though the city itself waited. Eleanor drew a breath she did not trust, aware that acceptance or refusal would echo beyond this hour. The Duke's summons, courteous yet commanding, marked the threshold of consequence, and she stepped toward it knowing retreat would define her forever, while courage, however constrained, might still reshape her fate. Eleanor stepped down from her carriage with measured grace, conscious of the eyes drawn to her by the Duke's sudden appearance, and inclined her head in the manner taught to women who must never reveal surprise. He stood a short distance away, hat in hand, his expression composed but intent, as though he had arrived not to intrude but to correct an error. When he spoke her name, it was without familiarity, yet it carried recognition, a subtle distinction that separated her from the murmuring crowd already forming at the edges of the square. "I regret the circumstances," he said, his voice low and even, "but I could not permit you to depart without offering what justice requires." Eleanor met his gaze then, noting the restraint in his manner, the careful economy of feeling that suggested discipline rather than coldness. She answered with equal formality, thanking him for his consideration, though she did not yet understand its nature. The exchange was brief, yet its weight unsettled her, for she sensed that politeness alone had not summoned him here. He did not ask her to return to the house she had left, nor did he detain her with questions. Instead, he proposed, with deliberate calm, that they speak privately, beyond the curiosity of onlookers. The request itself was bold, and Eleanor felt the tremor of scandal already beginning, but refusal would have transformed speculation into certainty. She agreed, and the Duke gestured toward his carriage, an invitation that altered the balance of attention in the square with visible effect. Inside the carriage, the world narrowed to the quiet rhythm of movement and the measured distance between them. The Duke explained, without ornament, that her broken engagement had not been a simple matter of preference or fortune, but the result of interference meant to obstruct him. He spoke of inheritance clauses, of alliances weakened or strengthened by marriage, of a family's decision to act before his approval could become obligation. Eleanor listened, absorbing the revelation with a steadiness that surprised her. Her humiliation, it seemed, had been collateral rather than cause. "I had given my consent," he said at last, and the admission, understated as it was, resonated more deeply than apology. He acknowledged responsibility without claiming authority over her fate, a distinction that mattered to her more than comfort. When he offered his protection, it was framed not as rescue but as restitution, an attempt to counterbalance the injury done in his absence. His name, his household, his patronage would shield her, if she chose to accept them. Eleanor understood at once the cost of such an offer. Protection implied visibility, scrutiny intensified rather than softened by association with power. To accept would invite speculation more dangerous than pity, transforming her from discarded fiancée into object of intrigue. Yet to refuse would mean retreating into obscurity, carrying a stain she had not earned. She considered the Duke's expression, searching for condescension or expectation, and found neither. He waited, allowing silence its due. She accepted, not with gratitude, but with resolve. The Duke nodded once, as though a necessary agreement had been reached, and from within his coat he produced a small seal, its engraving worn smooth by use. He pressed it into her gloved palm, explaining that it would serve as proof of his sponsorship until arrangements could be made. The gesture was quiet, almost severe in its simplicity, but Eleanor recognized its significance. It was a declaration that could not be withdrawn without consequence. News of their association spread with remarkable speed. By evening, drawing rooms whispered of the Duke's intervention, speculating upon motives with a relish sharpened by uncertainty. Some suggested ambition, others impropriety, and a few, more perceptive, recognized the re-emergence of political fault lines long thought dormant. Eleanor found herself the subject of renewed attention, her character re-examined through the altered lens of ducal favor. The same qualities once deemed insufficient were now described as rare. The Duke arranged her temporary residence under his protection, insisting upon propriety even as he defied convention. Their interactions remained formal, yet charged with an awareness that every courtesy carried implication. Eleanor observed him closely, noting the careful boundaries he maintained, the effort required to balance obligation with restraint. She sensed that his intervention had exposed him to risk as well, and the knowledge steadied her resolve. Late one evening, as rain traced slow patterns against tall windows, the Duke addressed the scandal directly. He did not minimize it, nor did he promise ease. Instead, he acknowledged that society would test her endurance, probing for weakness, hoping to reduce her again. "What has been taken from you," he said quietly, "cannot be restored by silence." The words lingered, neither comfort nor command, but an invitation to stand. Eleanor felt the weight of that choice settle within her. Protection had become partnership in consequence, and she recognized that whatever followed would demand courage equal to dignity. As she returned to her room that night, seal clasped tightly, she understood that her story had shifted from withdrawal to resistance. The city beyond her window continued its restless murmuring, and within it, forces already stirred, waiting to see whether she would endure or yield. Under Ashbourne's roof, Eleanor discovered protection carried its own silence. The Duke governed his household like Parliament, orderly, restrained, conscious. They met daily, exchanging courtesies weighted with questions neither voiced. Eleanor sensed his vigilance, not over behavior, but her spirit. He watched her endure scrutiny without flinching, admiration unsettled him. London responded predictably, magnifying whispers, testing boundaries, rewarding bold presumption. Invitations returned, carefully phrased, neither welcoming nor entirely excluding Eleanor. She attended selectively, aware presence itself functioned as quiet defiance. Ashbourne accompanied her sparingly, understanding absence could provoke louder commentary. In solitude, their conversations lengthened, shedding formality like unnecessary armor. He spoke of duty as inheritance, learned early, rarely questioned. Marriage, he admitted, once promised stability, delivered grief instead previously. Eleanor listened, recognizing loss tempered him, yet never diminished integrity. She confessed fear of vanishing, becoming anecdote whispered then forgotten. Ashbourne regarded her steadily, acknowledging visibility carried peril yet power. He did not promise affection, only constancy, an offer heavier. Their restraint sharpened intimacy, making pauses resonate louder than declarations. Outside, pamphlets circulated, speculating motives, hinting influence reached Parliament itself. Ashbourne warned consequences approached, alliances unsettled, opponents newly attentive everywhere. Eleanor absorbed the warning, refusing retreat despite uncertainty tightening inward. One evening, firelight softened the library, courage stirred between them. Ashbourne disclosed the engagement's ruin was designed to weaken him. He had underestimated their willingness to sacrifice her dignity entirely. Eleanor replied softly that dignity survived when guarded deliberately always. The admission bound them, transforming obligation into shared resolve quietly. Neither named love, yet possibility settled, delicate, insistent between them. Ashbourne questioned whether she regretted accepting his protection now truly. Eleanor answered honestly, fearing dependence, yet valuing chosen alliance deeply. Her candor impressed him more than compliance ever could possibly. From that night, their understanding shifted, acquiring fragile intimacy gradually. Society sensed change, sharpening scrutiny, awaiting inevitable misstep patiently hungrily. Eleanor prepared herself, rehearsing composure like prayer each morning alone. Ashbourne observed quietly, recognizing her courage matched any statesman present. He wondered when duty had transformed into something perilously personal. The realization unsettled him, yet retreat seemed increasingly impossible now. Both understood a reckoning approached, demanding choice beyond caution soon. For Eleanor, invisibility no longer tempted, despite its safety promised. For Ashbourne, restraint faltered, tested by her steadfast presence daily. Their alliance matured, no longer temporary shelter, but shared front. Yet neither spoke the word society most feared hearing aloud. Silence remained their shield, even as pressure mounted relentlessly everywhere. Eleanor sensed endurance itself had become a declaration already publicly. Ashbourne prepared contingencies, knowing exposure would demand decisive action soon. The city waited, restless, anticipating scandal or surrender eagerly cruelly. Within Ashbourne's walls, resolve quietly hardened into purpose together silently. Neither could predict the cost, yet both accepted inevitability fully. Eleanor slept lightly, dreams colored by vigilance and hope entwined. Ashbourne reviewed letters nightly, weighing loyalty against exposure carefully alone. Both sensed the private could not remain contained much longer. The approaching season promised assemblies, decisions, and irreversible visibility everywhere. Eleanor resolved to meet it standing, not hidden any more bravely. Ashbourne resolved likewise, despite consequences shadowing his position relentlessly publicly. Their mutual resolve formed quietly, unannounced, yet unmistakable between them. In restraint, they discovered courage's truest expression shared silently together. The calm before decision settled, fragile as frost overnight everywhere. London breathed expectation, ready to witness elevation or ruin imminently. Eleanor felt steadier, knowing choice defined dignity beyond fear entirely. Ashbourne watched her, understanding partnership demanded visibility soon publicly openly. Neither mistook the path ahead for gentleness or cautious souls. Still, they advanced, guided by principle rather than fear together. The next public gathering loomed, unavoidable and decisive for them. Eleanor prepared gowns carefully, aware symbolism mattered immensely now there. Ashbourne prepared words, fewer yet sharper than blades forged carefully. Both knew restraint would soon give way publicly irrevocably there. Anticipation tightened, transforming patience into deliberate tension everywhere palpable now. Eleanor reflected briefly on departure morning, distance traveled inward since. Ashbourne recalled that Carriage, realizing fate had intervened decisively then. Neither regretted that interruption, despite ensuing turmoil and risk everywhere. Resolve replaced regret, shaping their shared future steadily together forward. The hour approached when silence would break decisively publicly soon. Eleanor welcomed that moment, heart steady despite gathering eyes there. Ashbourne prepared to speak, authority tempered by care and purpose. Both recognized history rarely favors the timid or cautious souls. Their courage, once private, prepared for public trial together visibly. The gathering would decide reputations, alliances, and futures irrevocably soon. Eleanor felt ready, whatever judgment followed, dignity intact within her. Ashbourne felt resolved, prepared to claim responsibility openly there publicly. The alliance, forged quietly, awaited its proving ground imminently now. London's appetite for spectacle sharpened noticeably. Anticipation thickened everywhere outside. Eleanor stood at her window, breathing deliberately, centering herself fully. Ashbourne awaited downstairs, composed, ready to act decisively now there. Their paths converged, no longer avoidable, demanding public acknowledgment soon. Silence had served, but speech would decide everything henceforth there. Eleanor stepped forward, accepting consequence as companion without regret now. Ashbourne followed, authority steady, intention unmistakable to all present there. Together they approached the threshold of public reckoning calmly prepared. The moment promised clarity, regardless of outcome, consequences accepted fully. Eleanor felt her story reclaim authorship at last openly there. Ashbourne accepted the same, relinquishing calculated distance deliberately publicly now. Their partnership stood poised, visible, undeniable before assembled society there. What followed would define them both within history's gaze forever. The threshold beckoned, demanding courage sharpened by restraint alone now. Eleanor crossed it internally, ready for witness and judgment there. Ashbourne matched her pace, solidarity unspoken yet absolute there now. The moment stretched, charged with impending revelation for all present. Neither retreated. That choice itself became statement publicly irrevocably there. Their silence ended, replaced by imminent declaration before society now. The gathering hushed, sensing history unfolding within its walls there. Eleanor inhaled, prepared to be seen without apology or fear. Ashbourne began forward, ready to claim her openly before all. The assembly room glowed with candlelight and restrained anticipation, every chandelier reflecting an audience trained to observe without appearing to stare. Eleanor entered on Ashbourne's arm, not clinging, not distant, her posture deliberate, her composure unmistakably chosen. Conversation softened as they passed, curiosity sharpening into attention, for restraint displayed so openly unsettled expectation more than impropriety ever could. Ashbourne acknowledged acquaintances with measured inclination, offering neither apology nor explanation, his presence itself asserting permission where none had been granted. They took their places among ranks that once excluded Eleanor entirely, and she felt the subtle recalibration occur around her, the silent negotiation of relevance. Whispers traveled, but no one spoke aloud, awaiting direction from authority rather than conscience. Ashbourne did not delay long. Rising with deliberate calm, he requested the room's attention, his voice neither raised nor hesitant, a tone practiced in chambers where decisions altered nations. He spoke of obligation, of consequence, of the damage done when influence was exercised without honor. He named no family, accused no individual, yet every listener recognized the implication. Then, with equal composure, he acknowledged Eleanor, describing her conduct, her endurance, her worth, not as defense but as fact. The effect was immediate, discomfort rippling outward as society confronted its own complicity. Eleanor stood when he finished, not prompted, not startled, but prepared. She did not plead, nor did she recount injury. Instead, she claimed agency, stating simply that she had accepted Ashbourne's protection knowingly, valuing truth above comfort. Her voice carried without ornament, strengthened by conviction rather than volume. For the first time, she felt not examined, but heard. Silence followed, dense and irrevocable. Then murmurs resumed, altered in tone, recalculating rather than condemning. What could not be dismissed was now absorbed, reshaped, accepted with reluctance. Ashbourne extended his hand again, not to escort her away, but to remain, an assertion that retreat would imply doubt neither possessed. In the days that followed, responses arrived measured and varied. Some withdrew entirely, others approached cautiously, acknowledging change without enthusiasm. A few, discerning advantage, offered renewed alliances. Eleanor observed these shifts with clarity, recognizing that acceptance was conditional, but dignity no longer negotiable. Ashbourne remained constant, neither triumphant nor defensive, his steadiness anchoring her resolve. They did not announce an engagement. Such declarations belonged to certainty still forming. Instead, they continued as they had begun, openly aligned, privately deliberate. Eleanor learned to navigate her visibility with intention, selecting when to appear, when to refuse, understanding absence could now speak as loudly as presence. Ashbourne, too, adjusted, relinquishing some calculated distance, accepting scrutiny as consequence rather than threat. Their conversations deepened, no longer circling what must remain unsaid. Affection emerged gradually, recognized without urgency, shaped by respect rather than escape. When Ashbourne spoke of his late wife, it was with honesty unburdened by comparison. Eleanor listened, not as replacement, but as witness, understanding that love matured through acknowledgement of loss. One evening, quieter than the rest, Ashbourne offered what he had not before, choice without condition. He spoke plainly, asking whether she wished to continue beside him knowing consequences would persist. Eleanor answered without hesitation, affirming presence not as obligation, but intention. The simplicity of the exchange carried more weight than ceremony. London adjusted, as it always did, accommodating what could not be undone. Eleanor's name re-entered circulation, no longer paired with pity, but consideration. She remained aware acceptance could recede, yet fear no longer governed her decisions. Ashbourne stood with her, not elevated above judgment, but unbowed beneath it. Their future unfolded without spectacle, marked by continuity rather than conquest. What had begun in interruption concluded in alignment, dignity reclaimed not through triumph, but perseverance. Eleanor understood at last that security earned through self-erasure was no security at all. Ashbourne recognized that authority exercised without conscience hollowed itself. Together they moved forward, neither idealized nor diminished, their partnership grounded in deliberate choice. Society watched, adapted, and eventually turned its gaze elsewhere, leaving behind a quiet example of resistance shaped by restraint. Eleanor did not forget the morning she departed London in silence, But she no longer measured herself by that loss. She had been seen, and in being seen, had chosen herself.